Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. You should not bring attention to things like this normally, but just a little bit ago, I shaved and I nicked my lip, and it will not stop bleeding. But the show must go on. I was either going to tell you the truth, or I was going to tell you that I got in a fight with some Antifa protesters outside the studio here. And man, you should see the other guy. Hey, my book, Imagine Jack and the History Kids. It's on Amazon right now. It costs me $100 a month to store it in the warehouses. They're upping it to $200, so we're getting rid of them. I'm taking it off Amazon. So this is your last chance to buy Imagine Jack and the History Kids. I'm taking it off this weekend. Do this right now. So I'm just gonna read one page for you. So the very short of it. Jack, he's a kid, plays the video games, he's bored, his mom tells him to go outside, use his imagination, and he interacts with his friends who are all pretending to be different historical figures. So the one that no one knows is James Hill. So here's James Hill right here. So here's all the kids, and he's making a railroad. So James Hill is the only person to make a major railroad tycoon. He's a tycoon, the only one to do it without any government money. So we got some good capitalist propaganda in here as well. So they're making the railroad, and I just love this line right here. They're like, what are you doing, bud? And he goes, I'm laying the tracks for you to travel at ease. To make this invention calls for great expertise, but it's worth the hard work because when it's completed, you can travel the country and still remain seated. And then you turn the page and then, bah, it's a big railroad and all the kids are dressed up like George Washington and Thomas Edison and all that. It's that. Imagine Jack and History Kids. Your kids will love it. Tomorrow, we're gonna do our special on police officers. Brandon Tatum's gonna be one of the guests we're gonna talk to. So we're gonna talk a lot about what's going on in Georgia right now and get his insight on that. Something I've noticed, and the mob rule, right? You know, it's one thing to talk about the mob rule, with like getting rid of Aunt Jemima syrup. But it's another thing when the mob can influence the DA of a city to take down a police officer and charge him with murder because the mob demands it. That's a whole next level. So we're gonna talk a lot more about that tomorrow. I wanna share this though, something I've noticed. It's very difficult to tell the difference between a white supremacist bigot and a Black Lives Matter activist. Right? You'd think those people are totally opposite, but they're not. They're the same. So this is the latest example of this pernicious collectivism. This is a reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times. Right? She says, the Chicago Sun-Times will capitalize the B in black when referring to people who are part of the African diaspora. The same will be done for the B in brown. So the Sun-Times will now read black and brown communities. We will continue to lowercase the W in white, which is a wider descriptor of people of numerous origins. This is amazing. So white people, just see if you can follow this. White people are of numerous origins, but all people from the continent of Africa are just black. And then you take people from India, Pakistan, Peru, Latin America, and we're just gonna lump them all together under the browns. That's like the woke, intellectual thing to believe now, right? So add that to the list of things that Klan members would do, right? Seriously, let's go deeper. There's a bunch of these. So if you were an alien from outer space, right? Alien comes down from outer space, and you give this alien these different proposals and policies, the alien would not be able to tell if they were a Klan member or Black Lives Matter activist. Okay, so here's the most obvious one. Black-only spaces on college campuses. Right? You would think Klan members would say, blacks only in these rooms, only the blacks, no one else, just black people, and same with the water fountains. We got black water fountains, we got white water fountains, no mixing. But instead it's the Black Lives Matter people saying, all right, everyone out, blacks only in these rooms. You'd think it's the Klan who would say, no more police in black neighborhoods. Let the blacks fend for themselves, right? Instead, it's the Black Lives Matter protesters who are saying, no more police in our neighborhoods. let us fend for ourselves. That's the whole community policing thing. You know, originally, the complaint decades ago in black neighborhoods was that the police didn't care enough, right? They didn't care enough. There were no police around, and we need more police. That was the original complaint. And now it's, get rid of the police. Now, very small minority of black activists want this. A vast majority still want the police, but that's the narrative where we're headed right now. So you can't tell the difference between, so the proposal, get rid of the police in our cities. Who's saying that, Klan or Black Lives Matter? We played the video the other day of the black students in South Africa saying that they need to eliminate all the sciences and start over from scratch. No more science, right? And this person cited Isaac Newton, saying that Isaac Newton was a white scientist, and we need science that speaks to us, speaks to black people, and our experiences. Remember that video? We played it like Tuesday. You'd think a Klan member, right? You'd think a Klan member would say, hey, Isaac Newton is our scientist. He's white. You come up with your own black people science. You can't claim Isaac Newton. Come up with your own equation for gravity. Black people, he was a white guy. It's not Klan people saying it. It's Black Lives Matter. Who says they want black people science? Science that speaks to us. Got another one, Oxford University. They're now allowing black students who, the word was, feel impacted by the killing of George Floyd, the opportunity to apply for a reduction in workload and special consideration in their exams, okay? People who feel impacted, like a family member, like George Floyd's cousin goes to Oxford, like what are you talking about? But you'd think it'd be Klan members who would say, listen, people, we all know that black people can't handle the workload of Oxford University. They can't, black people can't handle it. They're not intellectually capable enough, and they're not emotionally capable enough to handle life and the workload of Oxford. You'd think that's what a Klan member would say, but it's not. It's Black Lives Matter people saying, you know, black people just aren't capable, emotionally or intellectually, of doing the work of Oxford University. You got Black Lives Matter activists there at Oxford treating black people as some sort of disability. Same thing here. You'd think it'd be the Klan who would say, white people are very diverse, and we come from a lot of different, unique, and wonderful places. But all the blacks are the same. Black and brown, them the two types of other people. That's all we got. Two, black, brown, and they're all the same. But that's Black Lives Matter, saying all black and brown people are the same. That's so crazy. So really, think about it. I wasn't joking about anything I said, but all silliness aside, the argument is that a person from France and Spain are very different, right? That's what they said. White, what was the quote? White, a wider descriptor of people of numerous origins. Okay, so it's gonna stay lowercase white, lowercase t. So France and Spain, very different. But someone from India and Mexico, pretty much the same. Brown. They're just brown. Capital B, brown. Do you see how racist that is? Like, do you see how unbelievably racist that is? But that's the academic, fall in line with that. That's what the smart people are saying you have to think. We're gonna take all the people from India, Peru, the Philippines, and Brazil, and we're gonna pile them into one group called brown. And then everyone in Africa is just black. It's amazing. I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing it. Shows Chicago Sun-Times, they wrote a whole thing about why they're capitalizing black and brown. Now, here's what they said. Our decision to capitalize black is an acknowledgement of the long-standing inequities that have existed in our country and the unique role that black art and culture have played in our society. So what they've done is they've turned black further, I mean, this isn't the first time, but further into a cult. Your black skin color makes you a part of the lived experience of all black people. And therefore, you have a claim to all the injustices experienced by any black person. So you're now a club. Black, it's a proper noun, right? The blacks, team black. It's not just a color, it's an identity, capital B. The color of your skin isn't black. You are now capital B, black. Thank you for your contribution to the arts, blacks. That is so wildly racist, I can't even stand it. But couched under, like, if the Klan magazine wrote this, we could do a segment and be like, geez, look at these racists. People are unbelievable. But it's the Chicago Sun-Times telling you this is the woke thing to do. Cultural trends among white people, this is sometimes, cultural trends among white people, Italian Americans, Irish Americans, et cetera, are much more disparate, which was the key factor in our decision not to capitalize white. So the words disparate mean, dictionary definition is essentially different in kind, not allowing comparison. So they say white people's cultures are so different, they can't be compared, but all blacks, all browns are the same. Let's capitalize it. That stuff is sick. That's Klan stuff. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, how awesome was yesterday's show when we talked to Professor Wilfred Riley? I can't stop thinking about it. He is the man. Will DeBeast 630 on Twitter. What do you say? That was like his rapper name or something in high school. And he can't change it now because he's got too many followers. So it's Will DeBeast 630. The numbers that he shared yesterday, Professor Riley, the new Thomas Sowell, the clarity that he was able to provide, it's so liberating. Right? Things are so confusing. Everything is so intentionally foggy. To get someone to speak the truth and provide clarity, it was so refreshing. So there's 2 points on that I want to make here. There's a common message that we've heard, obviously, about defunding the police. Now, something I've heard about that, people in support of that, they say, oh, we can defund the police. It's easy. We've been defunding education for years. Right? And you've heard that line for forever. It's not true. We have not been defunding education for years. Right now, nationwide average, and we can break this down per city, everything, right? But nationwide, $15,000 per student nationwide. Adjusting for inflation, since 1960, that's a 280% increase, okay? That's not a decrease, 280% increase. The dean of the School of Education at UVA wrote an article in the Washington Post the other day and wrote, public funding for schools has actually decreased since the late 1980s, all right? Now, that was the claim. Public funding for schools has decreased. This isn't just some random person. This is the dean of the School of Education at UVA, all right? Now, the Washington Post had to issue a correction. I love this correction. An earlier version of this piece stated that public funding for schools has decreased since the late 1980s. That's not the case. In fact, funding at the federal, state, and local levels has increased between 1980s and 2019. Okay, that's not an error. That's the basis of the entire argument, right? There's so many examples this we can give, but time is of the essence. But here's one. So the New York Times, this is like in May or something. The New York Times said that U.S. public education costs $400 billion. But based on their own source, it's actually $739 billion. K through 12. So it wasn't 400, it was 739. 85% higher than their original claim. But, okay, who's gonna quibble over $500 billion here or there, right? I'm not even gonna, right, at least you're in the ballpark. To say that spending is decreased when its fact is increased, you're not even in the same universe. The premise of your entire argument's wrong. You can't just correct that a little bit. You just gotta delete the whole thing. You are wrong. People are living in a delusion. So again, when Professor Riley comes in and provides clarity, it feels so good. But how can people just continue to believe and to spout things that just plain aren't true? I want to continue on a bit here with the theme that there's very little difference between Klan members and Black Lives Matter activists. There's 2 policies going on right now that are done in the name of helping black people, but are actually hurting them. And hurting black people more than white people, even though Black Lives Matter activists are arguing for it. To the point where you'd think Klan members would be arguing for these policies. Roland Fryer is a name you may have heard recently, and you will certainly. He's a tenured professor at Harvard. He was I don't know if he was the youngest black tenured professor or just the youngest tenured professor. He was 30 when he got tenure, right? He's like 43 now. He said in 20 plus years of data analysis, he's never seen the data so clear in all of his life. So here's the story. There's police departments that are investigated, and he measured the number of police contacts with citizens before the investigation, and then there's the investigation, and then the number of police contacts after the investigation. And he noticed there's no difference in police behavior, right? Before the investigation or after the investigation and during it. No difference in police behavior based off of number of contacts between the police and people. But after a viral event, so after Michael Brown in Ferguson or Freddie Gray in Baltimore, right? After a big viral event, when the investigation begins, police contacts go down to almost zero. He says in Baltimore, they went to zero. He said you can't have negative police contacts, right? So it went down to zero in Baltimore. And Chicago, number of police contacts dropped by 90%. So what are the effects of that? Because of that, crime shot through the roof. It was like the purge, right? Just game on. The criminals know it. It's total lawlessness. So he looked at the 2 years after the viral event, after the investigations began, right? 2 years following, in just 6 cities, the number of homicides increased by 900 compared to the baseline average of what would be expected. So 900 more black people were killed, and 34,000 more felonies were committed, obviously disproportionately affecting black people. So 900 more black people killed because of the decreased police presence, 900 more black people killed, 34,000 more victims of felonies, right? Keep that in mind with what's going on in Atlanta right now. Black people in the inner city, all people in the inner city, need to be celebrating the police. They need to be rallying for the police, jumping up and down, thanking the police, starting police recruitment drives, right? There needs to be a huge cultural push to get more good people into police departments and root out the bad. But overall, with a tone of celebration and gratitude. This abolish the police thing, it gets all the attention, but it's terrible for black people. Again, you'd think the Klan would be arguing for that. Trayvon Martin's mom, she's running for county commissioner in Florida. She doesn't agree with the defund the police. She said, I think we need more police. She said we need police with better standards and police with better ethics and better work habits. Of course. But if we abolish the police, get rid of the police, here we have proof of what happens when you do. No need for a thought experiment. The evidence is clear. Get rid of the people in your life and the inputs in your life they're just human fog machines. We need less noise, more clarity. And I'm grateful for the professor for providing that clarity. Similarly, not following the data. California, the University of California system. The Board of Regents, I don't know why they call it the Board of Regents. I hate that word. But the people in charge of the university system, they got rid of the SAT test as a standard for admission. So one of the regents said, I believe the test is a racist test. There's no two ways about it. The SAT is racist? How? By the new standard of racist. So the new standard of racism is anything that results in a disproportional outcome among the races, it is then therefore racist. Remember we gave the example, the rule says you can't punch your teacher. If more black kids than white kids punch their teacher, then the rule is racist. Same thing with the SAT. If you average all the black people together, average all the white people together, black people get lower SAT scores. Therefore, the test itself is racist. That's the thinking. So the board voted 23-0 to get rid of the SAT. Over the next 5 years, they're going to phase it out. And Janet Napolitano, who's the head of the UC system, she supports this. She's been supporting this for a long time. But here's the deal. There was a faculty vote that was taken a couple weeks ago. They voted unanimously to keep the SAT. There was a year-long task force that was commissioned by Napolitano herself and found that the SAT and the ACT, they actually increase Black, Hispanic, and Native American enrollment across the 10 UC systems. They increase minority enrollment. The report said, to sum up, the SAT allows disadvantaged students to gain admission to UC. Hold on, I thought it was a racist test. So we're told it's a racist test, and we're told that the test helps minority and disadvantaged students get. So which is it? Again, this momentum to name everything as racist has serious implications. It's silly to get rid of Aunt Jemima syrup. But you get the mob thinking on the officer in Atlanta, right? We got to take down the white cop no matter what, just for justice. And the mob thinking here has caused the Board of Regents to completely dismiss the data about the SAT and to completely dismiss faculty recommendations, all in the name of appeasing the mob. Oh, it's a racist test, no doubt about it. So why does the SAT help people? The SAT was founded 100 years ago by what's now the College Board to help qualified Jews, Italian, and Irish people get a better chance of being admitted to college. That was the beginning of it. At the time, only the super well-connected would get into college. It was very subjective. Right? So people came forward and said, hey, let's make a nationwide test so we can objectively measure people's, the reasons why they should get into college, their aptitude or college readiness or however they defined it, right? But we need an objective test that everyone takes, right? So there's a chance to say, hey, look at this Irish kid. You may not want Irish people, you think Irish people are dumb or whatever, but here's this Irish guy, took this test and did way better than these other kids that you were going to admit, even though they're well-connected, right? So it was designed, and still does, but it was designed to give underprivileged and less connected kids a leg up. Still does it today. 2018, UC, University of California system, admitted 22,000 applicants with how they defined weak grades but strong SAT scores. All right, 22,000. 25% of those were minority kids. Half of them were low income or first generation. The SAT were these kids' tickets in to the UC schools. They didn't discriminate against these kids. It was their way in. 24% of Hispanics, 40% of Black students, and 47% of Native American students who gained admission into the UC system did so because of their SAT scores, not despite them. You do away with the SAT, they wouldn't have gotten in because their grades and all these other measurements weren't up to par. But their SAT score, wow, look at this kid. He actually is really smart. He would do really great here. You get rid of that, now what are they looking at? Not that. Now, these kids, they wouldn't have, and kids in the future now won't have the chance to objectively prove themselves against others. Amazing. Now, the Regents also said that they may come up with their own test instead of the SAT. So, what are you doing? Right? If the argument is, oh, people, bad test takers, or there's a lot of pressure on tests or whatever, you're just flipping it out. I guarantee you the new test is going to be all social justice style. It's ridiculous. But here's the point. Progressive activists say to get rid of the police and get rid of the SAT because they're racist and they're hurting minorities. And in reality, look at the data. The police save Black people's lives, and the SAT gives minority kids better chances of getting into colleges. You want to take it a step further? I'll go there. The activists who are pushing this stuff, they're killing Black people, 900 of them in those 6 cities over 2 years. They're causing more Black people to be victims of crimes, and they're causing more Black kids to not get accepted into better schools. More reasons why. It's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between a Klan member and a Black Lives Matter activist. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I love CHAZ. I think it's fantastic. Now, listen, people actually live there, normal people live there and can't go back to their homes now, and that's terrible. Yes, of course. But generally, the idea of it, I hope Trump does not shut it down. It's a beautiful experiment in human nature, and it's happening in real time in front of us. They built a wall. They built a wall to keep people out. They have armed security guards. They're fighting each other nonstop. It's beautiful. Apparently there's word that they have a warlord who's trying to impose his will on the hippies there. It's fantastic. They're trying to build their utopia, and it's awesome to watch them just fail miserably. Trump needs to let it fail. I saw a video of some guy whose car was broken into, some resident of CHAZ, and he was screaming at everyone that no one stopped him from stealing his stuff. And you're watching, and you're like, oh, you know what you need? The police. Once these kids live like this for a while, they'll realize we have the police for a reason. And they'll realize that this society they're rebelling against, it's all like this for reasons. You think you can do better? You can't. Reminded me of this scene from South Park. This is the episode where all the hippies come to town to take down the corporations, man. And the kids are like in it. They're like, yeah, corporations are awful. And then here's what happens at the big concert.
Wow, this band is so crunchy. Dude, I need more weed.
So it seems like we have enough people now. When do we start taking down the corporations?
Yeah, man, the corporations. Right now, they're raping the world for money.
Yeah, so where are they? Let's go get them.
Right now, we're proving we don't need corporations. We don't need money. This can become a commune where everyone just helps each other. Yeah, we'll have one guy who makes bread, and one guy who he looks out for other people's safety.
You mean like a baker and a cop?
No, can't you imagine a place where people live together and provide services for each other in exchange for their services?
Yeah, it's called a town.
You kids just haven't been to college yet. But
That's so great. Yeah, it's called a town. Did you see this sign yet? I want to know what the newest one. This was a couple days ago, so I'd love to see what the update is. But there's supplies needed, right? Supplies needed. Clothes, cigarettes and lighters, lanterns, flashlights, headlamps, portable solar chargers, tents, sleeping bags, track phones, body lotion. There he goes, all right. And the bottom, sunglasses. Sounds like what you guys need is capitalism. You can't claim to be in the autonomous zone and then demand a list of things that come from, I think it was Dan Crenshaw who said, things that come from an orderly capitalist society. Your autonomous zone will never be able to make any of these things. Your autonomous zone will never be able to manufacture sunglasses. In a million years, you'll never be able to do it. Because to manufacture sunglasses, you need property rights. You need oil. Actually, you need oil to make all these things. What do you think tents are made out of? You need oil, you need drilling contracts, you need electricity. And you need electricity that comes from carbon, man, to run your manufacturing facility. You could never make any of those things. The things that you bask in and take for granted every single day. This is textbook definition of mooching. This is the guy, Mom, I hate you, Mom. I hate you. You're disowning you, Mom. Also, it's getting a little toasty in the basement. Do you mind turning the AC up a bit? Also, when you make my toast in the morning, it's a little too toasted and you just scrape off the burnt part on the top. And I can tell, Mom, so you just toast it a little better. Also, the Netflix account, don't watch in the afternoon because your account is only one account at a time. So either buy 2 accounts, stop being so cheap, or stay off when I want to watch, Mom. And I hate you so much, Mom. I reminded the line again, hating America is like hating your parents for not buying you a jet ski. That's all these people. So Trump or Seattle, whatever, you don't have to invade this area. Just cut off their electricity, cut off their water, cut off their food, make them truly autonomous. Who is it? Rules for Radicals, whatever his name. Rules for Radicals guy. He said, not Cloward Piven, whatever. He said, make the other side live up to their own standard. So there you go. Make these autonomous people really be autonomous. They'll last like 12 hours. Have you seen the pictures of these little gardens that they have? So they put down these cardboard boxes and they sprinkle some topsoil on it and they just put some plants on it. That's their garden. And I saw one video of someone clearly high on something just kicking it all around. He was just having his own little dance party in the middle of the garden and no one can do anything about it because there's no police. So nothing's ever going to grow. And I saw one of the plants, it was like a basil plant, okay? So I don't know what you plant up with the basil on. We're going to survive off of basil in CHAZ. Right? We have all these things in our society for a reason. And I guarantee you, if they did let this go on, they would just become everything they hate. They'd have to start police, they'd have jails, right? Surely they'd deport people, right? Someone comes in, they're causing trouble, they arrest them a couple of times, they can't be contained, so they deport them back to America. They already have a border. All right. Enough of that, these guys. Here's the bottom line. This is Matt Walsh. I like this tweet. Here's the bottom line with privilege. This is my grand conclusion of all this before we get to our guest. He said, yes, I'm the beneficiary of privilege. The privilege is this. I had 2 parents. They stayed married. They made sure I stayed in school. They gave moral guidance. My kids have the same privilege. Anyone with this privilege will have a fair shake at life. Anyone, any race. Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, all the great abolitionists of that era and after slavery knew the key to success in America. And I would argue so the name, the technical term for these people at this point, they're called the dispossessed. That's the word, the technical word for it. So for whatever reason, these people don't have or choose not to have the skill sets that are necessary to be a functioning member of a civilized society. And they blame everyone else for it. And they blame the system, man, for it. So if you use drugs and you don't show up to work, we'll just do those two alone, right? So if you use drugs and you don't show up to work, you're not gonna live a great life. You're not gonna live a great life, you're not gonna have a lot of money, you're not gonna have a lot of opportunities, and if you're a dude, you're probably not gonna get a girlfriend because who wants to be with you? You're lame. So it's easy when these things are not going well for you to blame the system. We gotta make our own system, man, where I can do drugs and not go to work and still get the girl. It's not gonna happen. Well, maybe in CHAZ, where all your dreams can come true. I'll see how life at CHAZ works out any better for you. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I like to know as best I can, what's causing all this? Like, what's the philosophical, academic underpinnings of what we're seeing right now? And I gratefully came across this tweet from Christopher Rufo, one of the friends of the show. He said, our current political moment comes straight from Marxist theoretician Herbert Marcuse, using the identity of the oppressed to achieve the political economy of the intellectuals. Race is the means, socialism is the ends. Once you understand this, all of the news over the past few weeks suddenly falls into place. I want it all to fall into place, so I need more information. Christopher Rufo is here, director of the Center on Wealth and Poverty at the Discovery Institute. Christopher, how are you, brother?
Very well, how are you?
Good, man, thanks for being here. So let's just go right to it. Who is Herbert Marcuse?
So Marcuse is a European intellectual who was part of what's called the Frankfurt School. And these were kind of neo-Marxists, people that had a conviction in Marxism, but their twist on kind of traditional, kind of classical Marxism was that you really have to look at the cultural foundations of a society. And it's not just about economics, as Marx wrote. It's not just about class war. It's actually something that you need to investigate at a cultural and psychological level. So you really took kind of the core tenets of Marxism, or those core goals, but then they're really trying to figure out how to establish them through cultural institutions, how to establish them really psychologically in people's minds. And Marcuse, his development that I think really explains what's happening today is that he talked about what you could think of as kind of a coalition of the dispossessed. He believed that, for example, the African American in the United States was really the most legitimate and authentic voice. And when you could kind of corral in oppressed groups into a coalition, they would have the cultural authority to then tear down the system. And you're really seeing that, and you're seeing that in the CHAZ in Seattle, you're seeing that in the discourse and what you're seeing in the national news. And it all comes straight out of the kind of 1960s Frankfurt School playbook. And once you think about it that way, all of the strange eccentricities that happen, you can kind of put them in that context, and suddenly they make more sense.
Okay, beautiful. Let's go back one more step. So I hear Marx thrown around a lot, right? Karl Marx. So the thing I understand about his philosophy here that is applicable, correct me if I'm wrong, is that he saw the world as a battle between the oppressed and the oppressors, and there always has to be a conflict, a constant conflict between the two. Is that fair? And what else needs to be known about him?
Yeah, he thought, the oppressed and oppressors is kind of a development of that concept, but Marx really saw it as a class struggle. He saw it as the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. And that was really Marx's core insight, where he said all of history can be reduced to a class struggle, to reduce to a struggle of kind of the people versus the powerful. You still hear that rhetoric today, the people versus the powerful, the 99% versus the 1%. That's really kind of class-based Marxism. But the oppressor and oppressed dynamic comes a bit later, and then is really fully explored by the Frankfurt School, including Marcuse. And what they add is that they're saying, well, it's not just about class. It's actually about race and gender and sexual orientation and all of these other identity issues. So they add that new element, which is looking at identity. And I think if you want to kind of compare this to today, what's happening, Bernie Sanders is an old school Marxist. Bernie Sanders doesn't really talk about race. He doesn't really talk about orientation. He doesn't really talk about any of the identity issues. He's really an economic Marxist, where he says the 99% versus the 1%, the billionaires and the millionaires. I mean, really, that's his thing. He's an old school kind of turn of the century Marxist. But what you're seeing is that, you know, that couldn't get mainstream attention. I mean, it could get mainstream attention, but couldn't achieve power. Bernie Sanders, for example, you know, he couldn't even win a Democratic primary, despite some heated energy. But so I think what you're seeing now is the substitution of the kind of Bernie Sanders, old school, classical kind of class conflict. You're seeing now a new identity-based rhetoric and a new identity-based argument, which at this point is sucking up all 24 hours of the news cycle. It seems like a better strategy. They're trying to divide by race, divide by gender, divide by sexual orientation, split it into a kind of oppressor-oppressed dynamic, and then use that as the foundation for their political power and their political movement. And, you know, it's too early to tell. I hope
Smart.
it's not successful. It's
makes
antithetical
sense
to our Constitution. But what it does is that it's successful. It taps into identity rather than class. And I think that is proving to be a much more kind of emotionally stirring and emotionally kind of galvanizing movement. So that's kind of what we're seeing, especially in the past few weeks.
What is you mentioned back to Marcuse, cultural institutions. What are those?
You know, these are everything. Everything is a cultural institution. So things like the family, the kind of, you know, the Marxists 100 years ago, and then again, you know, in the 1960s, made an explicit effort saying we need to break up the nuclear family. The nuclear family is a kind of an impediment to our revolutionary goals. It's a vestige of patriarchy and all that's wrong in the world. So let's break up the family. And then, you know, media, they recognized very quickly that controlling the messages in the media was extremely important. And kind of the kind of functioning of the culture can be deciphered through the media. It's through things like, you know, most of these folks were kind of militant atheists. They thought that the church was a huge impediment. This goes back to Marx again. So all of the kind of institutions of traditional culture, they wanted to demolish. And then they thought that when we demolish those traditional institutions of culture, the family, the church, you know, in some places the Constitution, the kind of political institutions. Once we demolish those, we can create the new society. And in a bizarre way, that's what you're seeing at the CHAZ, at the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. They're saying there's no churches here, there's no families here, there's no Constitution here, there's no United States here. We've demolished all of those. We've established our new revolutionary culture, and we're going to base our new society on those principles.
Yeah. What was like Marcuse's or the guys at the Frankfurt School? Did they clearly articulate, like, legitimately what their end goal was? I mean, it's one thing to say we need to tear it all down and rebuild a perfect society, right? I mean, like, whatever. But did they really think this would work? Or, like, what was their driving motivation, you think, behind all this?
You know, I think it's twofold, and I read this, the intellectuals, the kind of European intellectuals of the 1960s who were very influential also in the United States. You know, it's hard to say, but I think you can say that they absolutely were convinced that the system that existed as it does today needed to be destroyed. And they were very specific about that. They had a huge body of work that pointed out all the flaws in the system and why it needed to be destroyed. But they don't get into so much detail as, well, then what's next? What does that perfect society look like? It's really like a society of absence. So they say, well, it's absence of racism and sexism and inequality and wealth hoarding. And they really kind of, the big flaw and the big reason that these socialist kind of countries failed so miserably is that when you destroy the traditional institutions, a society based on the absence of those institutions is not necessarily a good one. In fact, it can be a violent and repressive and deadening society. So they're really, like the people in the CHAZ, they have convictions of what they're against, but the convictions of what they're for are a little bit hazy, a little bit murky, and at the end, unworkable.
I guarantee you, you've seen the pictures of the CHAZ gardens. I guarantee you someone's gonna come in and ruin the gardens, and they're gonna say, oh, we should have people designated to protecting the gardens, and they should have some sort of weapons or something so that they can defend the gardens against people who wanna cause them harm, or whatever, right? They're just gonna turn into their own society just like we have here with all the things. I think there was an old Seinfeld episode when the hippies were like, hey man, what if there are like people who like, one guy who like baked bread and one guy who like protected houses. And then Cartman was like, you mean the baker and a police officer? Right? There's a reason we have these traditional roles. So what, how do we defend this, I should say? Because you know the trick they put you in, right? If you defend it, then, well, it's easy for you to say, Mr. Rufo. I mean, like, you're my own white guy and all this thing. So how do you stand up proudly and defend tradition? Is that what it is? Is that the opposite of the Frankfurt School, traditional?
Yeah, I would say you're defending tradition, you're defending the Constitution, you're defending family, you're defending kind of local communities, you're defending, free markets for many people, you're defending all of the kind of institutional infrastructure of the country. You're defending the flag. I mean, there's a lot of points to defend. And I think, you can do two things. One is that you can fight them on their territory. You can say, well, no, you want to burn the flag, we want to wave the flag. That can be effective, kind of using emotional symbols in kind of a battle between the forces. But I think that the really deeper challenge is to try to actually understand that the Frankfurt School theory is actually very influential. And if you look at the kind of dominant media narratives in the United States, they're very much left-wing oriented. If you look at the universities, again, very much left-wing oriented. If you look at even the sciences, as we've seen with the coronavirus lockdown, you have scientists that were saying that, anti-lockdown conservative protests were killing people, but then protests against racism are okay, and using their scientific kind of authority to kind of push that message. So what I think you have to do in a deeper way is actually, attack. Essentially, they've won in a weird way. Marcuse's vision of controlling the cultural institutions has really happened between the 1960s and now. Broadly, the left controls all of the kind of knowledge-making industries in the United States. So I think you have to start there. You have to attack this problem at the root. What you don't want to do is, getting into the argument of, kind of debating their slogans. That's not going to work because their slogans are designed to really be undebatable, and they're kind of cleverly engineered. You really want to then actually kind of use their own tactics essentially against them. You want to undermine the credibility of mainstream media. You want to attack the kind of ideological energy and ideological power of the universities. You want to really go at them where meaning is made and where knowledge is generated, and then create kind of strong new institutions that can stand for the principles that I know we share, that can kind of stand as a counterweight to really kind of an uncontested cultural power.
So good, Chris. What's a slogan that I love how you say they're cleverly engineered? Would Black Lives Matter be one of these slogans, or can you think of one off the top of your head?
Black Lives Matter is a great slogan, and again, it comes from the 1960s. The slogan in the 1960s was Black Power. And I think what the new generation of activists learned is that Black Power is not inclusive, it's combative. It's basically saying it's scary to a lot of people, let's say in the suburbs, or kind of, people who aren't kind of into radical politics. And that's really why that slogan and that movement had an endpoint, because it was really not engaging the mainstream. Black Lives Matter is like a therapeutic slogan. It's a very kind of soft slogan. Anyone can get behind it. You have children, suburban moms would not be posting their 5-year-olds, with the fist saying Black Power, but they're absolutely putting on their Instagram, their cute, 8-year-old daughters saying Black Lives Matter. So it's a great slogan. And it's one that everyone agrees with. Yeah, I mean, I agree with
exactly.
it. You agree with it. Yep. Everyone agrees with it.
And I'm so glad you said cleverly designed. That's such a way. Go ahead, please.
The problem, though, is that Black Lives Matter, everyone agrees with the statement. But if you actually look at the organization's intent, it's kind of 60s radical socialism, radical redistribution, all of the kind of most extreme left policy goals. And underneath the slogan is a bad agenda. And we have to disagree with the agenda, and not get too caught up in the slogan, which again is something that's universal. Yeah.
30 seconds, this is unfair, but use the word dispossessed. Why is this philosophy appealing to anyone and the dispossessed?
Yeah, the dispossessed is basically if you feel left out, you feel excluded, you feel kind of pressed on by your society, you can join this new coalition. And it taps into the kind of ancient idea of the outsider, of the band of outlaws, of the all of those old myths, and you have the kind of people who have been excluded now rising up and taking their place. So it's a powerful thing for people who are angry, people who are upset, younger people who feel left out, to want to get revenge. And that's really what this is designed on.
So good. Chris, what's your Twitter so everyone can follow you?
So Twitter is Real Chris Rufo, last name RUFO. It's Real Chris Rufo on Twitter, on Facebook. You can Google me, you'll find me.
Okay, Director of Center on Wealth and Poverty at the Discovery Institute. Christopher, you're the man, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Superb. Love that stuff. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.